Or the delivery. I don't know. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Judicial Proceedings Committee. Today is Tuesday, April 1st, 2025. We have 4 bills on the docket. And we're going to start off with Delegate Bhandari with House Bill 1363. Delegate Bhandari, welcome back.
Chair Smith, Vice Chair, and honorable members of this wonderful Judicial Proceeding Committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of House Bill 1363, places of public accommodation, captioning for motion picture houses alteration. Last year, our state demonstrated its commitment to inclusion by enacting legislation that made movie theater more accessible to patrons who are deaf or hard of hearing. HB 1363 builds upon that progress, expanding captioning requirement to include motion picture houses with at least 4 screens. We are taking another meaningful step towards equity and access for all citizens. This bill ensures that more individuals, especially those who are deaf, hard of hearing, seniors, English language learners, and young readers can fully enjoy and participate in the shared cultural experience of cinema. Open captioning offers a seamless, dignified, and user-friendly solution, free from technical barriers often associated with personal device. We understand that the industry had concern regarding reporting requirement. I want to acknowledge that these concerns were heard, discussed in good faith, and an agreement on an amendment was reached. Unfortunately, due to an oversight, the agreed upon language was not included. I'm formally offering that amendment and have already spoken with the Economic Matters Committee in the House side, which is committed to honoring it as well. With this amendment in place, HB 1363 strikes a very thoughtful balance, advancing accessibility while remaining mindful of operational concern within the film exhibition industry. This bill reaffirms our state leadership in creating inclusive public spaces without placing undue burden on small businesses. At the end, as Mother Teresa once said, not all of us can do great things, but we can do small things with great love. HB 1363 may seem like a small change, but for many Marylanders, it makes a world of difference. I respectfully urge a favorable report on HB 1363 with the proposed amendment. Thank you for your consideration, and I have Jacob Leffler testifying in favor of this bill.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Delegate Bhandari. Mr. Leffler. If Mr. Leffler could come up, oh, yeah, never mind, you can, that's right. Perfect.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Chair Smith, Vice Chair Waldstreicher, and committee members for the opportunity to explain why this bill is critically important for passage in the Senate. First, I want to express my gratitude for your past support and efforts in passing the previous version of the bill, which was signed by the governor last year. Now it's a pleasure to see you all again to discuss this important issue will ensure more movie theaters are more accessible across the state of Maryland. Currently, the law mandates that movie theaters with 8 or more screens provide open caption movies twice a week for the first 3 weeks after a film's release. However, this applies to only 39 theaters statewide, leaving 15 theaters exempt from providing open caption movies. Our goal is to ensure that all movie theaters are accessible, so people don't have to drive up to an hour or 50 miles just to see a movie with open captions. Under the current law, these counties that only have theaters with 7 or fewer screens in most cases are not required to provide open caption movies. These counties include Allegheny, Baltimore City, Calvert County, Dorchester County, Kent, Talbot, and Worcester counties as well. This bill, which reduces the threshold to theaters with 4 or more screens, will help resolve this issue by ensuring that more movie theaters statewide, particularly in the Eastern Shore, Southern Maryland, Western Maryland, are able to provide more open caption movies. For example, right now, only one movie theater is currently required to show open captions on the Eastern Shore area. And with this bill, we will add an additional 5 theaters, which is a 500% increase on the Eastern Shore. We have been working closely with Delegate Bandari and NATO, the National Organization of Theater Owners, and we've agreed with the amendment that has been proposed and offered. So I want to thank you all for agreeing with that and coming to a compromise. We hope that Maryland will lead the nation in ensuring equal access to movies for everyone. Passing this bill will make our state a shining example of inclusivity and accessibility. I want to thank you again for your support over the years. Let's continue to work together to make Maryland a more welcoming and accessible state for all residents. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leffler. All right, we'll now hear from Ms. DeBerry. DeBerry here.
I think she is not here.
Okay.
I'm sorry, she had to leave, excuse
Yes.
us.
Okay, that's right. Well, we went a little long on the floor today, so that's good. Okay, Senator, so that'll conclude the testimony for the proponents of the bill. We'll now switch over to the committee for questions. Senator West.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I supported this bill last year, the movie theater bill. But my understanding is that movie theaters are in a state of decline. Do you happen to know, Delegate, how many movie theaters in the state of Maryland have closed their doors during this decade? Between 2020 and 2025, how many of the Maryland movie theaters have gone out of business?
I could get back to you with that data.
Also, when a movie goes to streaming or on television, isn't it possible for someone who's deaf to get the captions on the television set if the movie is being streamed?
Yeah, that is possible, but with these movie theaters, they don't have to, based on my research and experience, they don't have to invest anything extra. It comes with that options. And this bill will make accessible to the deaf and hard of hearing. I mean, when you watch movie on the screen, the experience is different than watching a movie on your
No question,
computer.
I appreciate that. I'd much rather see a movie on a big movie screen than, well, some movies on a big movie screen. Some movies are perfectly sufficient to watch them on your television set. But, so let me tell you where I'm coming from. My concern is the movie theater owners are small business people. We're losing so many small businesses in Maryland anyway. I don't want to pass legislation which is going to cause more small businesses to shut their doors. So if this bill would put further financial impositions on small businesses, it's not something that I would be likely to support, especially when the movies that are shown in the movie theaters within short order these days are streamed and can be viewed by interested viewers at home with the captions on the television sets. So how would you respond to that?
Yeah, thank you, Senator, for being a leader. I do remember when I got elected in 2018, it was the first bill that we worked together to help the deaf and hard of hearing. Thank you so much for your leadership. To your question, I don't think that it will harm the small businesses because it's not for every theater, right? And this is a compromise bill. We talked to NATO, and because of this, actually, the business and the customer will be increased as well. So it is not like blanketed. Every theater has to show this, like if they have 4 or more. So definitely there will be the increase, and they will collect the revenues.
Is there an organization of movie theater owners in Maryland?
Yeah, they will be testifying after.
And they're in favor. And they're in favor of this bill?
Yeah, they are favor. We work over when I filed the bill, when we worked we work extensively on this bill. And Senator, for your information, and this bill became the first bill after Hawaii in the nations to have this sort of provision. So we extensively work, and there was a reporting requirement, and the NATO said that it'll be too much, and we compromised. And after me, somebody from NATO will be testifying.
Great. Compromise is always good. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Senator.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Further questions from the committee? Senator Fulton, yes.
Mr. Chair, I apologize. Good to see you, Delegate.
Thank you.
This may have been answered, and if it did, I apologize. We just had this bill, didn't we just pass this bill on 8 screens or something last year?
Correct.
So why are we, I don't understand, why are we back already? We haven't even had time to see.
Yeah, because the bill we passed was also a very compromise bill. That bill does not include the whole Eastern Shore and so many counties in the city that Leffler mentioned are left out. That is the reason why we need this bill.
So we don't want to, it was a compromise bill, but now we don't want to wait and see how the compromise works out. How it works out, for a couple years to see the process.
As I stated, Senator, with due respect, because the current bill, if we do not pass the bill, the entire jurisdiction, so many, as Leffler pointed out, they won't enjoy this wonderful movie experience. I would defer to Leffler if you want to add, what exactly this bill will do if we pass.
Yes, please. Thank you so much. You are correct. We did pass this bill last year, Senator Fulton, with 8 or more screens. But that limits it to 39 movie houses across the state of Maryland. In the city of Baltimore, and in several counties again, Allegheny County, Dorchester, Kent, Talbot, and Worcester, none of those counties have have movie houses with 8 or more screens. So none of them are required to provide open captioning at all unless requested. So folks who want to see an open caption movie that's available on a screen with their friends or their family are going to have to drive an hour or 50 miles, right? And remember, and maybe you do or don't, I'm sorry, that open captioning doesn't cost anything extra for the movie theater, so there is no financial impact to the state or its constituents at all. There have been several houses that have closed, but that hasn't anything to do with open captioning. It all had to do with COVID.
Sure.
So.
Okay, thank you for that answer. I appreciate that perspective for sure. My follow-up question is then, these movie theaters that don't have the open captioning, they have other available means for those that are hearing impaired, do they not?
They do, Senator, but that cranking devices, I tested myself. Sometimes doesn't work, and we are talking about very vulnerable folks who cannot communicate. And those devices are available, but sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, and it's kind of hard to have the internal effective communication, making sure that those devices are ready. And I tested myself. I went to the local movie theater, and but majority of the time, those cranking devices really doesn't work.
Okay, I appreciate the answers. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Just one quick question. Under the current legislation, are any Baltimore County theaters currently operating with the? I tell you yes. Okay, thank you. That's all I was curious.
Yes, Senator.
Excellent. All right, further questions from the committee? All right, seeing none, thank you both very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, so with that, that'll conclude the testimony for the proponents of the bill. Now switch to the opposition panel, and Manny, come on up. And then is Mr. Murdoch, Doug. Oh, you're saying, okay. Doug is from virtual. All right. I mean, if you could come up to the, oh, you're gonna stay right there. That's good. All right, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee. Manny Giraldo, here for Cornerstone Government Affairs on behalf of NATO, who will be testifying virtually. Just want to clarify, we appreciate that the delegate is putting the amendment in. NATO does not support the bill, but they support the amendment, and we are neutral on the bill. But we would not oppose it if the amendment is accepted by the committee. And there's a question, there are 56 theaters now in Maryland, but in the last 5 to 6 years, 10 have closed up. Movie theaters have had a very hard time since COVID. They've not reached their pre-COVID numbers yet. So it is an industry in the state that is struggling. But on this bill, we accept the amendment. We appreciate the delegate and the advocates for working with us. And we are neutral on the legislation. Doug Murdoch, who's on screen, will kind of talk a little bit more about the movie theater industry, but we appreciate the committee's time, and we hope that they accept the amendment. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you very much. All right, we'll take questions after Mr. Murdoch comes in from NATO. Since, Mr. Murdoch, since you're from NATO, not NATO, but from National Association of Theater Owners, we're not gonna let you testify until you tell me how many countries are in NATO. It's an evolving thing, but yeah.
Well, in fact, just last week, they announced they are renaming the association Cinema United. We have not renamed Mid-Atlantic yet, but we are now Cinema United.
There you go. Well, the answer is 32, but that's good. All right. Doug, go ahead. Good to see you.
Well, good afternoon, Chairman Smith and Vice Chair Wallstreaker and members of the committee. As you already know, I'm Doug Murdoch, the Executive Director of the Mid-Atlantic NATO, which is the Association of Movie Theaters in Maryland. And I apologize that I couldn't be there in person, but I thank you for inviting me to speak virtually. As outlined earlier, we had worked with Delegate Bondari on amending this bill to remove the impractical and costly collection of showtime reports. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, the amendment wasn't introduced during the House hearing and never reached the committee. At the time, we were neutral to the bill based on the amended version, but we now find ourselves having to be in opposition based on how the bill is currently written. I've outlined our position on written testimony that was submitted, but wanted to mention again that the reporting required by the bill would not be just a burden to the theaters, but very costly to the state. While I'm unaware if a fiscal note was prepared for this bill, might I point out or bring to your attention that when the District of Columbia was working on an open captioning bill last year, the committee report indicated a fiscal impact statement where the chief financial officer outlined that it would cost the city $1.3 million over the next 4 years to implement, and they have only 6 theaters to monitor for compliance. Maryland would have reports and showtimes for 53 locations to review. So for that reason alone, I am not sure how this bill moves forward. We ask for your unfavorable report as written, but will support or not oppose if it is amended. Thank you again, and be happy to answer any questions.
Excellent. Thank you both very much. All right, questions from the committee. Saw Senator James first, then Senator West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am worried post-COVID, even before COVID, but post-COVID, theaters are closing right and left, and I represent Harford County, and we lost our largest theater. We have a small one in Aberdeen that is really not doing well. And so I'm absolutely in favor of helping the hard of hearing or impaired to get as much access to movies. I love them too. Could you just speak to whether or not this in any way has a fiscally negative impact on movie going in general in other areas? And it may not have any, that's fine, but I just want to know if there is any data one way or the other about that, doing this kind of program.
Thank you for that question. And over the years, we have tried to get as best data as possible. But what we find is that the shows are not very well attended. So the impact is in lower ticket sales.
So what you're saying is that in the specially set programming that has the, for the hard of hearing, there's low attendance generally, is that correct?
Generally, yes.
Then the question is, I don't know whether, I know we passed a bill last year and then this is here. Is that in any way interfering with having a better attended show at a like time? Or do you all work collaboratively in some way to make sure the shows that you're having, which you know will have low attendance, are not pushing out a different show or without the accommodation that would have higher attendance?
So currently, the industry is not doing as well as they had in prior years.
Yeah, all right.
So it's really hard to pinpoint any specific reason for that, except for maybe film supply. But the theaters that are doing it now do try to look at the best times. I know that specifically some of them work with the deaf and hard of hearing community to pick a time that will be, collectively attended by as many people as possible. Frederick, Maryland is a perfect example. They have the Maryland School for the Deaf. So the Warehouse Cinema actually will reach out a week or two ahead of time and say, what's the best time? So that under the bill, they're required to play 2 shows per week. They get the best time on a Sunday afternoon and try to get as many people there. And that's...
Yeah. I don't mean to cut you off, but maybe you can jog my memory. I know we passed a bill last session, so to start this. So I've forgotten whether that bill allowed some flexibility with theater owners and the communities that want this help to work together to pick those times. Sounds like that's what happened in the last bill. So that flexibility exists, and my, little bit of concern about the economics is really unwarranted because of the flexibility in the bill, the prior bill that we passed. Is that correct?
That is correct. They're
Okay,
flexible to play the shows at the best times. And it was only for theaters with 8 screens or more, and that was done primarily not to hit the little guys.
Yes.
But I do understand the advocates want to expand that footprint to some of the areas that don't have a theater. I understand that. But we just have to kind of look closely at that other part of that bill that had the reporting, which is just cost prohibitive.
I agree, and I think you're right that wouldn't be a good way to move forward. All right, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
So this bill wants to change the existing law where if you have 8 screens or more, you have to have closed captioning for movies, and they want to change it to if you have 4 screens or more. And the reason to do this is because in some of the smaller counties, they don't have 8-screen cinemas. They have much smaller cinemas than that, right? I assume that the reason why they don't have large cinemas is because there's a smaller theater-going public in these small counties. Wouldn't you agree?
So for instance, Baltimore City, there's theaters there. They all are doing open captioning voluntarily. This bill would make them do it as a requirement. But for instance, the Charles Theater is only 5 screens. So they weren't covered by the bill, but they have a pretty robust program. The Warehouse Cinemas that operates in Frederick has a 7-screen in Baltimore City that was not covered by the bill. They are also doing it. So the theaters are doing it, and they are, everybody can reach out with requests should they want it. This bill then would just make it a mandate, which is the request of the advocates.
Okay, well, Baltimore City is sort of a special case. I grew up in Greater Baltimore, and I've probably gone to the Senator Theater as much as anybody in the community, which is our flagship movie theater in Baltimore City. My wife and I incidentally went there 2 weeks ago to see a recently released movie. I think we were one of 14 people in the big theater. It was really pathetic compared to years past, where the big theater had a healthy crowd. But I'm really actually more interested in the rural communities. So one of the reasons for this bill is so that closed captioning would be available like on the Eastern Shore, so people wouldn't have to travel so far. But I guess my concern is in the Eastern Shore, the counties don't have large populations. And I would think that would be the main reason why they're not 8 cinema complexes, but much smaller complexes than that. Wouldn't you agree with that?
And just let me clarify one thing for everyone. Closed captioning is required by the ADA for every theater, every screen.
I'm sorry, we're talking about open captioning here.
This would be open caption, which is on the screen instead of on a unit.
Yeah.
So the theaters, it's in my testimony as a list of the theaters that would be added, and you can see them all listed there. So for instance, there is a flagship in Ocean City, which there's a Gold Coast Theater in Ocean City. There is the...
Well, let's stop there. Let's just use Ocean City as an example. So during the height of the summer season, there are a lot of people in Ocean City, but the other 9 months of the year, not so many. And my working hypothesis here, if I could just express it, is that the reason why there are not larger theater complexes in these more rural Eastern Shore counties is because the population is lower and there are not enough people to warrant more than 4 theaters in these local communities. Because the population is lower, the deaf population is concomitantly lower, and that requiring these movie theaters to have open captioning would serve a relatively modest number of deaf people. And what would be the cost to the movie theater industry of having special showings of movies open captioned, I keep saying closed, open captioned in these small communities? Is this going to cost the theaters money and make it more difficult for them to turn a profit?
So there's no dollar to put the captioning on the screen. The impact is by the lower sales. And I might point out that the first theater on the list to closed in my closed locations was the Fox Sun and Surf in Ocean City, which closed in September of 2022 and has not been replaced. So the theaters are struggling to stay open. And we're just trying to do everything we can. But if there's a group of folks, every theater has already agreed that all you need to do is call the theater and we'll work with you on trying to schedule the show. It can't be done on demand because you got to do it in the background. But sure, everybody can go in. Many of them have it right on their website, a little click place where you can say, I would like to have an open caption show. So they'll do it, but to do it on a regular basis is very difficult.
Thank you for your answers to my questions.
Thank you.
All right, further questions from the committee? All right, seeing none, thank you all very much. Thank you, Mr. Murdoch. Soon to be not NATO. All right. With that, that'll conclude the hearing for House Bill 1363. Thank you very much, Delegate Bhandari. We'll now move on to, I see Delegate Cardin is front and center. Let's go to House Bill 1480. So Sarah Love, you've been bringing in the cookies, you know. Usually I try to have some fruit, some healthy snacks around. Someone stole all my fruit this morning. I'm peachless. I got a morbid dad joke that I'm going to tell in a second, but it's fine. All right. All right. That's right. All right. Delegate, welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is John Carden, for the record, here on House Bill 1480. This was not cross-filed, so this is your case of first impression here. Esteemed members, for the record, I'm asking for a favorable report. This bill would establish oversight standards for Maryland's child advocacy centers to help provide a safety net for some of our most vulnerable children. So for those of you who aren't familiar with child advocacy centers, and probably everybody is, these are the organizations, 24, one in each jurisdiction, that are assigned young children, and sometimes old children, to be able to help and service and provide treatment for and other therapies, because as wards of the state, they've been assigned to them by Department of Human Services, Department of Social Services, because of neglect, abuse, mistreatment, maltreatment. These are the most vulnerable children in our communities, in our entire state. These are people who oftentimes look to harm themselves, harm others. They're very much at risk. Some of them are suicidal. These are the kids who have been neglected and abused for years on end. And the state has said to these CACs, who, by the way, let me make it clear, I think they are amazing organizations and they do amazing work, but they say, we're going to give you money, the state's going to give you money to be able to help and provide services to and protect and give stability to these very vulnerable children. And that is what these CACs do. And I applaud them for everything they do. So let me just make sure, because they are opposed to this legislation, but I applaud them for everything that they do. Despite receiving significant state funding through the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, these centers currently lack oversight and accountability. There is no state oversight of them. The bill, which passed unanimously out of the committee, out of appropriations, and out of the House unanimously, is a result of extensive work by an interim work group that was put together by the chair of the HGO committee, as well as representatives from DHS and the child advocacy centers. And they all got together and they worked on this legislation a lot. The bill follows a model similar to how nursing homes are regulated, with employees having their own licensing boards and licensing criteria, but also there's an additional layer of oversight for the actual facilities themselves, the centers, and that should be held true to the state agencies. I'd also like to thank my colleagues on the Appropriations Committee, maybe some of them are watching this right now, for their very thoughtful collaboration and work with the CACs and the advocates to make sure that everybody's voices were heard. This passed out of the House. As it passed out of the House, the bill requires GOCAP to collect complaints against centers and produce an annual report. If complaints need further investigation, the bill gives GOCAP the authority to refer them to the Attorney General's office. There's a letter from the Attorney General's office saying that that may not be the right way to go. I have drafted and can provide the committee or committee staff with an amendment that I went over with the Attorney General's office till late last night that may be able to remedy that issue and send it back to DHS where the Attorney General's office thinks it should be. I am very much open to that conversation. We just want to make sure that we're protecting the children. Another key concern is whether the CACs would have sufficient knowledge of the wrongdoing. To address this, the bill now applies specifically to individuals employed by the CACs, ensuring that the centers can be held accountable for their staff's actions. Overall, the bill incorporates meaningful input from the CACs, that's child advocacy centers. I'm using the lingo. I apologize for those of you not familiar. While adding important accountability measures to ensure that these centers continue their vital and important and really phenomenal work for Maryland's children. This is a necessary step to ensure that these children receive receive the high standard of care that they're getting from the CACs already maintained throughout most of the state. The opposition has talked about the fact that this is unnecessary. However, whenever you're receiving state funding, it's usually necessary to have some sort of oversight, and that it's unworkable. And as I indicated, there was a question in some of the opposition testimony about whether there are confidentiality issues in giving information to potentially abusers, the parents who might be abusers, which you're not supposed to give to them. That's ludicrous. There's standards of care and there's requirements specified in the bill that you shouldn't give information out to people that could potentially cause harm to the individuals that you're treating. And so with all due respect to the opposition, I think that this is just a question of organizations not wanting the oversight that should be. It's a very simple oversight. It requires a continuity of care. For those of you familiar with what happened in Montgomery County a few years ago, this is based on some hiccups that happened there. And all we're trying to do is make sure that no child is put into harm's way because there may be a firing or a change of a healthcare practitioner, and that the children who, this is the one stable person in their life, their therapist, who's calling them every day or whenever, and doesn't call them one day, that they don't wind up causing harm to themselves or others simply because something is happening at the CAC or its affiliated organization. So this is really an important bill. It has been worked on by the Appropriations Committee and the Health Committee tremendously. They have put their heart and minds into it, and it really, really is important to making sure these children are protected. And I would ask for your favorable report.
Good afternoon.
You want to come to the podium? You want to come to the podium?
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Stephanie Wolf, and I am a child and forensic psychologist here in Maryland. I am the president-elect of Maryland Psychological Association and the current chair of the MPA Legislative Committee. I'm here to testify with strong support for HB 1480. This bill is very feasible. I understand CACs. I have worked for 5 years within a CAC. I also currently work with the CAC and co-created a therapy program providing state-of-the-art therapy services. The opposition says the CACs are too different. They are housed in different structures and thus cannot have a uniform requirement. While it may be true that they are different and they are structured differently, there are fundamental similarities that make them CACs. To meet the definition of a CAC, all CACs must offer or have contractual relationships to offer medical, mental health, forensic, and victim advocacy services. These services must all look alike and are uniform. What these services look like are specifically spelled out by the National Children's Alliance. Thus, despite the differences across state CACs, there are far more similarities. How they function, what services are provided, how they operate are all the same. For this reason, adding in a continuity of care requirement and reporting to the state would be easy to incorporate. This bill is the result of what the CACs said that they wanted. Starting over 3 years ago, when we began trying to solve this problem, we reached out to the opposition. Meetings were held, input was asked for. We've always wanted to work with the CACs and solve these problems together. In fact, Senator Muse from this committee co-sponsored the first version of this bill 3 years ago in an attempt to do just that. We have continuously, in all 3 versions of this bill, tried to address the concerns that the CACs have. If I may continue. Okay, thank you. So a work group was convened last summer, and the CAC's opposition is disappointing. It's confusing based on the fact that all concerns were addressed. The risks of this legislation not being law are not hypothetical. I've experienced what can happen when CACs do not have continuity of care requirements. I was part of an incident in which 41 vulnerable abused children suddenly lost their mental health providers. During that incident, there was no mechanism for us to make complaints, and there was also no mechanism to ensure that the children had continuity of care. And so for that, I asked for support of this bill.
Thank you very much. So we have one more witness joining us virtually, and that is Mr. Savage. You're up.
Can you hear me now?
We can. Welcome.
Great. Good afternoon, Chair Smith, Vice Chair Wallstreeter, and committee members. Thank you for this opportunity. I am Dr. Pat Savage, a retired psychologist who spent 40-plus years serving children and their families, current chair of the Maryland Psychological Association's PAC, the immediate past chair of MPA's Legislative Committee, as well as a past president of the association. I am testifying in strong support for HB 1480. I have also provided you with extensive written testimony for your review. I am part of a team that has worked on this issue now for 3 years, and am saddened the CACs continue their opposition rather than working with us to ensure vulnerable kids are protected. We have worked to address each concern the CACs raised. Leadership in the House has worked to address their concerns. Amendments were made to the current bill addressing their concerns, and yet here we are with another set of objections. My testimony addresses inaccurate concerns, or my written testimony addresses inaccurate concerns raised by the CACs over the life of our efforts to protect vulnerable kids, if you choose to read it. HB 1480 is designed to protect kids, families, and the therapists who work with them from potentially devastating harm. A simple ask establishing continuity of care standards, minimal oversight by the state, and a mechanism to manage and correct complaints. HB 1480 requires accountability and transparency from CACs who provide mental health care to our most vulnerable kids and families. I refer you to testimony in the House on this bill as to the harm that kids and families experience due to inadequate oversight. Directly preventing therapists from providing appropriate terminations and interfering with continuity of care results in devastating harm to kids and families, but also to therapists who are forced to violate the law, standards of care, and/or ethics. Contrary to the CAC's claim that licensing boards are charged with managing violations of care mandated by their administrative decisions, licensing boards have no ability to protect kids or families from these decisions. However, you do today by supporting this bill. Enacting this legislation will encourage mental health clinicians to participate with CACs as it better aligns policy with professional standards of care and ethics. We all know we need more qualified mental health professionals to engage with our most vulnerable kids. I ask you to join us in building a world-class mental health system for all Marylanders by providing a favorable report on HB 1480. Thank you for this opportunity, and I will answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Savage. All right, that'll conclude the testimony for the proponents of the bill. Now switch to the committee for questions. Senator Love is up first, then Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Delegate.
Good afternoon.
You mentioned one of my concerns, and that is about information that is provided to a parent or guardian who is the abuser. And I believe the term you used was ludicrous, but I could be wrong, so I don't want to put words into your mouth.
Fair enough.
And in looking at the bill, can you explain to me how your statement is correct? Because it says each child advocacy center to establish a continuity of care plan that at a minimum shall provide written notification to the child and parent or guardian.
Right, I'm trying to pull up the language.
And I understand there are other provisions of law that might apply here, but when this bill says shall provide, it makes me concerned.
Because it specifies, and I might, you may be able to answer better than I can, but it specifies that it's only, it's in the best interest of the child that you cannot provide. I don't know if it specifies it in the reprint or not, but that it's only to the appropriate parties. And let me pull it, see if I can pull up. If the child was but again, while I'm looking for it, I will say that that is an easily solvable problem because we just have to make sure we're meeting the standards of care. So if in fact the intent of the legislation is to make sure that there's a standard of there's a continuity of care policy that is knowable, not that the information, and by the way, the continuity of care information is not the issue that you have. It's the question of, do we want a potentially a parent who may be a perpetrator of harm, knowing that this person is even seeing a therapist, and maybe we don't Like that's the question.
That is my question.
Right.
So
Right.
so my question is, would you be open to a slight tweaking of that language just to make clear?
Absolutely. And
Great.
in fact,
That's all I needed. Thank you.
But, yes.
So the other,
Yeah.
no problem. So just quickly, if a child is old enough to consent without their parents knowing, according to the law, then that continuity of care would go to the child because they were the ones to consent, not the parent. And so there's a lot of safeguards, as you mentioned, but as Delegate Cardin also said, that specifying that within the bill would be very easy to do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I echo Senator Love that to make this bill express and clear that a cross-reference to, how to address notification or repeat the, the restrictions on not sending to abusers has to be in the bill. But my larger issue is, I represent Harford County, and we do clearly do things a little differently up there. But to my understanding, every licensed psychologist, probably, I don't know about psychiatrists and social workers, in their licensure have continuity of care requirements. So explain to me how those continuity of care regulations would work with this bill, and what this bill is doing differently, since it looks to me like we have a continuity of care, which makes sense because not just abused children, but anybody that's in therapy would be
I didn't
wanting to
plant
have
this
that.
question, but I'm so glad you asked it.
I'm in too, because I can't wait to
I
hear
did
the
not
answer.
plant this question. Okay. So as Senator Muse will remember from a few years ago, so there was an incident in Montgomery County where there was
I know,
a
that
firing.
that
Okay.
tree,
So
whatever
the
it's called.
continuity care requirement by the standard required by the practitioners was that they were required to inform the people that they were leaving that they were no longer going to be servicing, right? That they were required to do that because they needed to know, the patients need to know that in order to make sure that they were aware that there was going to be somebody new coming. That's required by their own professional responsibility, their licensure as a psychologist or a social worker.
Who do they notify again?
They have to notify the person who they are treating. They're required to. The institution which they worked for forbade them from doing that because they were fired. So now they're caught in a situation where do they follow the law or do they follow their standards of practice and perhaps lose their licensure? So that's the exact issue that we're dealing with right here.
Can I get a clarification? So in the event of termination, because surely therapists have been terminated in other circumstances,
not for cause, by the way. They were not terminated because of.
It doesn't matter to me whether they were protesting or why they were terminated. They were terminated. But clearly terminations occur in other situations similar in the sense that you're employed by someone and you're terminated and you have clients or patients. So is COMAR not satisfied when the employer notifies the patient, there's been a termination or a cessation of this person
And that's exactly what this bill is intending to.
I'm asking you what COMAR says currently.
Right. No, so.
Surely there are circumstances where other therapists have been terminated and.
This is not contemplated in COMAR.
It's not, it's the COMAR silent?
It's not, I believe it is not contemplated in COMAR because there is no requirements for any kind of continuity of care policy by the institution. So
I don't understand that sentence.
Okay, so.
What did you just say to me?
Right, so there's no requirement for the institution.
What's the institution?
The CAC, the Child Advocacy Center.
I'm talking about any employer.
Right.
Does COMAR anticipate employers terminating therapists and how to notify patients of that termination.
I don't believe that is contemplated,
Okay, then we'll have to look at that.
which is why which is the intent of the bill.
Okay.
I mean, and
Now, the other question, and look, I remember that, and that was troubling because I think it is terrible. It doesn't matter whether you're a vulnerable child in an advocacy center or anybody in need of therapy, and your therapist disappears on you. That's pretty traumatic. So I'm not unsympathetic to the issue at all. I'm just trying to figure out how best to, get to a good solution. I guess the other thing is, I don't know what the professional licensure says or what ethics say, but if someone is terminated, now let's say it's not for protesting, it is terminated for something nefarious. Your bill seems to indicate, maybe there's some exceptional language, that nonetheless, that former therapist, you want to facilitate contact by the parent or child with someone who may have been fired for various. So what does the bill do there?
so that is in fact contemplated, and that should be, if there's any question as to whether, if they are fired for cause because of them doing something inappropriate with their patient, then clearly that if that's not specified, that they should not be able to contact them, and that could be. I'm open to that as well.
Yeah, I don't
But
see that in the bill, and I think the
Ms.
bill
Wolf.
opens up that problem, and so it's not,
Ms. Wolf can address that.
yeah.
So with continuity of care, so as you stated, the ethical requirements, licensure requirements are that psychologists, social workers all have that. There is no requirement that agencies such as the CAC ensure continuity of care. And so in a situation where the agency, where it's taken out of the control of the professional, where the professional is blocked from doing it for whatever reason, then all this bill is asking is saying, okay, let's make the CACs also make sure that continuity of care happens, whatever that looks like, what it needs to look like, right? It needs to look like notification. It may need to look like connecting them to have a goodbye session. It may not be if it was a nefarious situation.
Well, I'm reading it as mandatory that you have to do that.
That you have to have a continuity of care plan.
Well, it says to me at a minimum, you have to provide the name and information of the former person so that the parent and child have a means to contact that former provider. That's what the bill says.
Different iterations of the bill have had different versions, and if that is no longer there, then that is an easily amended piece if there's nefarious action.
Okay, well,
the important thing is just
Just trust me, the bill is silent to that, so you would
Okay.
be open to an amendment.
Absolutely.
Okay. I guess I'm troubled that everyone said this was a great deal of thought and consensus, and this is, the result of it, and yet I know two significant amendments that are needed. So let me just go on, because I have one other, and I'm so sorry I didn't get your name, ma'am, sorry.
Dr. Stephanie Wolf.
Wolf?
Wolf.
Dr. Wolf?
Uh-huh.
You indicated that, this bill shouldn't be a problem, even though there's diversity or differences between the various CACs, and I'll get to Harford County in just one moment. So there shouldn't be any problem, and they all look alike. But then I'm reading on page 5, and I think it's Roman numeral 1, a description of the standards for child advocacy centers established by the Maryland Statewide Organization for Child Advocacy Centers, and information on compliance of each child advocacy centers with the standards. I feel like that was a real circular thing to say, but what I'm troubled with is if they all look alike already and the bill's easily implemented because of that, this language seems to indicate that that you're going to have to describe what they do and how they work so that they aren't already similar in kind and services.
So, yeah, so I'm not.
What is that paragraph for?
I don't have that paragraph. I'm happy to take a look at it. Okay. But I can tell you that all child advocacy centers follow the National Children's Alliance standards, and so that there's commonalities, broad and very specific commonalities. Okay. And so a requirement that a child advocacy center has a continuity of care plan, as well as a requirement that there is an oversight system for complaints, is not something that would be difficult given they are already similar in so many other fashions.
Okay.
So, and I'll just say, I'm looking at the paragraph that you just
Yeah, yeah.
indicated. So there are lots, I mean, every single agency or organization that gets money from the state is required to file reports. So the GoCap was required, I mean, the different organizations that receive, I gave the example of how nursing, accredited nursing works. Every single one is required to file a description of the standards for whatever it is with the state so that they can be aware of what's happening. So why shouldn't child advocacy centers meet the same basic standards of just filing the information so that we know what they're doing?
Well, I'm lost in that language because it's sort of like you're asking them to describe the standards that are already established by the Maryland statewide organization. So either there are standards that exist and it's within the Maryland statewide organization, or they're not. But so I'm having trouble figuring out that language.
It's a nonprofit that has no policing authority whatsoever is where the standards are being held. And so why shouldn't, I mean, the state maybe should know about what those standards are. I mean, that's
So maybe, so you're saying maybe the Maryland statewide organization has not yet set standards, because that seems to be what that paragraph is saying?
I think that the Maryland Children's Alliance has, I would hope that the Maryland Children's Alliance has standards by which they adhere to for all of their child advocacy centers. They are the overarching nonprofit organization that accredits, or the National Child Advocacy Center Association that accredits them. But the state doesn't, I mean, the state has absolutely no input or knowledge about what that is, except to say that they know that this organization exists.
I don't know a lot about the CACs, so I have to look into it. But the last thing I sort of wanted to bring up just generally is, in Harford County, I don't know how the other county, and all of this is just getting me information. You know how much I like you, Delegate. In Harford County, we have a point person. That person's in the Sheriff's Department. He then has relationships with, a mental health provider. He works with state's attorneys. He works with other groups in the county, but we don't really have an office, and he's not an employer of the therapist. He does have a contractual relationship with them, right? He doesn't control them, because I think what he was contemplating, and what I think these CACs were contemplating, was that the COMAR regulations regulating therapists would govern, as opposed to a separate or additional standards by this very official CAC. We don't have an official CAC, with an office and, incorporated and that sort of thing. So we are going to struggle with the bill the way it is, because we don't have that sort of employer-employee direct control situation. And so when you talk about there was a consensus with all the CACs and this is what they wanted, how did you address the concerns of Harford County in the way we do it?
Sure. So that, as you brought up, there's that contractual relationship. And so the contractual relationship that Harford County has with the people that provide the therapy, in that contract is, it specifies, if it's following the requirements of the national organization, it specifies the type of therapy that needs to be provided. So all Hartford County would need to do is put within that contract, must have a continuity of care plan in the case of a firing, or in the case of the therapist suddenly leaving, and specify what that was.
Have you read the contracts that we have?
Well, I've read all the continuity of care plans in the state of Maryland for the CACs, and there are only 2 out of 24. And I don't believe Hartford County had one. I may be wrong, but from what I remember.
Did the statute provide initially when this, I guess this was created by statute, the CACs?
Yes.
Okay. So when they were created, did it say in that statute that they had to have a separate continuity of care different from the COMAR regulations for the professional licensure of psychologists, psychiatrists, and social workers?
So this is different from licensure level, right? Because you're talking about the organization preventing licensed clinicians from the continuity of care.
Well, in our county, we don't have an organization. We have a sheriff.
Right.
Deputy.
Right, got it.
Who is not an entity. He's not in a position to create, a standard of continuity. That's not what he does. He's a facilitator and a creator of links. So this bill would not work in our county.
So I guess that the only thing that I would add is that, that whatever the contracts that were created, that in your county were created, there was some guidance given as to how to create those. And so it would be really.
I have no idea about that, ma'am.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So typically, if it's following the National Children's Alliance, then they would provide that guidance. And so it would just be an addition of, and must have a continuity of care plan.
And my last thing, thank you so much for the indulgence, but the last thing is, and I do very much appreciate your work on this, both of you, and I'm educating myself. It sounded like there was a work group. They worked hard for a couple of years. I'm assuming they created, if not a report, something in writing, maybe, best practices, recommendations. You seem to indicate, Delegate, that the bill is a representation of what they most wanted. So I would like to see all that stuff in writing. And
I will certainly get you what information we have. There was a request for information made by the chair of the Health and Government Operations to, I think it was GOCAP at the time, and the report was demonstrated to all of us that legislation was going to be required. So I'll get you that information.
What was the name of the work group?
So there was, the work group was put together by
GOCAP?
By the chair, and GOCAP was on it, DHS was on it.
The chair of what?
Of HGO, Delegate Jocelyn Peña-Melnick.
Okay. I like her.
There was.
So it wasn't created by statute?
It was not, no, it was not created by statute. This was worked on over the interim.
But please, if you would.
Yeah, we'll get information.
Would you get me stuff in writing? That'd be really.
There were, and just to give you, yeah, absolutely. Okay. 17 out of the 24 jurisdictions have an association, a direct association with their local Department of Social Services, with a bricks and mortar. The other, help me out, 7, there's like 5 that work either with the state's attorney's office or, and then there's 2, I think, that work with the sheriff's offices. Okay. So there are, but all of them require a contract which then permits them to appropriate money from the state to be able to pay for the services, whether it be to the private contractor, the independent contractor, the nonprofit contractor. So all of them, in theory, are getting paid by the state for the services they're providing. And therefore, there should be, at least at the bare minimum, a understanding that if there's a gap in service to these very vulnerable children, you need to understand that gap, that there needs to be a policy there, and that's what this does. And if we're getting caught up on making sure that there's confidentiality issues, which I know Senator Love has an issue with, or you, Senator, have an issue with, we can work out those. I thought that this was worked out. I mean, the Appropriations Committee spent a tremendous amount of time trying to make sure that it was all done properly.
It looks like we have a number of amendments, but thank you very much for all your answers. It's been very educational. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator. Before we move on to Senator Folden, I want to just let you know, I know that you all, the House has reconvened and you all are on third readers. So I want to give you the option if you would like to go and do that. Or
thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. All right. Well, no, I mean, if you've got questions for the witnesses.
I'll wait for one thing.
Senator Folden.
That's all right. Thank you.
Gave you a lifeline. You should have taken it.
That's all right.
Hey, Delegate, how are you? Thank you for coming with the bill. So I have a couple questions, and I guess I'll just start off with following up on Senator Love's comments about the shall language, but I wanted to know in that same theme, I think it was you, ma'am, that brought up the idea that consent for child decision-making that you were saying that there was an age for, or whatever, for the consent for child
Yes.
decision making? What is that age?
I believe it's 16 or maybe 15. I'd have to double check. But that,
So if they're younger than that,
if they're younger than that, then a lot of it depends on the circumstances of each case. A lot of the kids that are seen in connection with the Child Advocacy Center are Child Protective Services or in custody of the Child Protective Services. So in those situations, the parent, if there's been abuse, then the parent would not be consenting to those services, and it would be Child Protective Services that would be consenting, and then they would be the ones that would get the notification about continuity or the foster parent, et cetera.
okay, thank you. I have a concern here because I have 2 letters from the Office of the Attorney General's office. So, and they say different things, but they're dated the same day.
Sure. So my understanding is that one amended the second one that came in is a update to the first one, and the second one that is the update is the one that says that they would defer for the investigative pieces to go back to health.
So, okay, I'm just trying to figure out, because it doesn't say update. They both say April 1st. I thought it was some type of April Fool's joke.
That would be an interesting joke, but it's in the first paragraph. You can see where it says updated. So it doesn't say it clearly in the heading, but it says it within the first paragraph that it's an update to the first letter.
Okay, I don't see that language in here, but that's fine. But they both show that. I think you were saying that the removal of DHS from the investigatory authority would be a mistake.
So
Is that the old letter?
So the new letter says that sending it back to DHS is their recommendation. So
the first letter said it would be a mistake.
Yes.
Man, you guys got the OAGs to issue a contrary opinion in the same day? Wow.
So I guess that's how they felt about it.
Okay, so what you're saying is the one that says on their letterhead that this would be a mistake is the older version.
I don't have them 2 in front of me, so I can't tell you definitively which says mistake or not, but I can tell you that the most updated letter is the one that says that we would like it to go back to health. It was sent to them, I believe, because of the CAC's request, and that was an amendment that they had requested that it be sent in that direction.
Just to clarify the record, I mean, representatives of the Office of the Attorney General are here if they'd like to clarify. If not, then I'm not going to put you guys on the spot, but all right,
Nope.
decline.
Thank you.
Yeah, all right.
So I keep hearing about this state funding, substantial state funding. How much is substantial state funding that each of these CACs receive?
I think it varies, but I don't know the exact numbers. But
I'm being told
we could get that for you.
It's like $12,000 per.
My understanding was it was much larger than that, but we could get you the exact numbers.
Yes, if you could do that, that would be fabulous.
Sure.
Thank you. And then, pardon? 12,500 per? Okay, 12,500 per. So in the state budgetary areas, that's not substantial.
Well, but
it's not even a Happy Meal.
Right, but if you multiply it across the 24 centers, and also just understanding that these are the most vulnerable children, so.
Yeah, no, I
so
get
the
it.
state
So
should have
$12,000
some.
doesn't go very far.
Oh, that's true. I'm sure that I'm sure the CACs would prefer even more state funding.
I would absolutely.
But I
agree with
think every time that the state does fund something within the state, especially involving the vulnerable children, there should be some oversight. There should be some mechanism for
Ma'am,
people that
I'm
are
not
hurt.
disagreeing with you, but there's a lot more money being spent without worrying about, go talk to the Department of Public Safety about all the money they're getting without having to account for any outcomes.
Sure.
Department of Juvenile Services.
Sure.
Millions and millions and millions of dollars, not 12,500. And we don't hold them accountable for any outcomes. We don't even ask them to give us outcomes.
Well.
So this is DJS.
That's unfortunate, but that
agree.
doesn't change the fact that, we're talking about the most vulnerable of kids, abused kids.
I got you.
Yeah.
So I want to know what was the hang up on, so back to Senator Love's point about where it said shall, and she referenced about the notification to could be the parent who's the offender. And I know that there was some discussion through the CACs, through Delegate Cardin and other stakeholders, that it would be, that they would change the word parent, notifying the parent, to the non-offending caregiver, or a non-offending caregiver, but that was rejected. Can you tell me why that was?
I was not privy to that discussion.
Would you have a problem with it saying that instead of parent, that it would be the non-offending caregiver?
So I would need to be part of the full discussion to fully understand what the different positioning is.
Okay.
I think the most important thing is that that the kids are safe and that kids, that there isn't notification, right? We're all on the same page.
We're all advocating for the same thing.
Yeah, yeah. So as far as the notification requirement, nobody, from what I understand, that are advocating for this bill would want notification that would end up harming kids. And so I think that any language that would inadvertently do that, there would be openness to change. And that's the most I can respond about that piece.
So if I'm understanding correctly, this is coming about because of two instances. Over a 5-year period, there was 2 complaints out of the 24 CACs. And in 2020 was the Montgomery County one, where the 3 terminated employees took issue. And then an investigation was handled by the Maryland Office of the Inspector General and the Maryland Department of Labor, and all 3, as well as Montgomery County, and all 3 investigations exonerated the CAC of any wrongdoing.
That is, the full scope of what you just said is, with all due respect, not entirely correct. If I could clarify, I would be happy to.
So this is from the Director of Policy and Legislation from the GOCAP.
So there was, first of all, it was not 3 people involved, it was 5 practitioners that were wrongfully terminated. Those wrongful terminations were turned over to resignations. And also, when we talk about it, so that the need for the bill came out of that incident, and what it showed was when these practitioners, including myself, were terminated, it showed that there's no place to go if there's a problem within a CAC. As far as patients, there's no place for patients to report concerns, and there's no place for practitioners to report concerns. Every place that we went, nobody could help us all throughout the state, and that data that you just cited is extraordinarily helpful because it's surprising in that in 24 different child advocacy centers servicing thousands of children, that there would only be 2 complaints all across. And so that, to me, is not actually, to me, that signifies, and to others as well, hopefully, that signifies that there's a problem that complaints are not being able to be made. I've never been part of a system where thousands and thousands of people were being treated and thousands of people across 24 different organizations, and there was 2 complaints. And so that in itself highlights the need for oversight and a complaint system, which this bill creates.
I get it. So when I look at the National Children's Alliance, their comment is that there's already established procedures, including the filing of a complaint with the Maryland Board of Examiners of Psychologists, are already in place to ensure that should a therapist fail to transition a client appropriately, the matter can be addressed through censure and other disciplinary actions.
And that doesn't work when you're talking about an organization doing wrongdoing, not the practitioner. We actually did reach out to the boards. We reached out to the Board of Psychology. We reached out to the Board of Social Work, and they said, you know what, there's nothing we can do because this is an organization. This is a child advocacy center that is not doing continuity of care. This isn't the practitioners. The practitioners are wanting to. The practitioners are doing everything they can to do continuity of care. So this isn't something the individual licensures can do.
Okay, so when I look under COMAR, it says that the Code of Maryland plays a crucial role in ensuring the continuity of care, especially within, or particularly within behavioral health systems. by outlining these programs, requirements for various programs. It outlines requirements for health plans to extend benefits, blah, blah, after termination of coverage in certain instances. Is that not what we're talking about, I guess?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
What I'm saying is there's already a continuity of care provision already in COMAR,
Not as it relates to child advocacy centers.
but
Nothing.
there is for therapists.
Individual therapists, there's a
Correct.
requirement, but when you're the agency a therapist works for does not allow that to happen, that's when we have a problem, and that's when patients are hurt. And that's what this bill is trying to address and remedy, is when a system, when an organization, when a child advocacy center says, no, we're not going to do continuity of care, there's nothing to stop them from doing that.
But, okay, we're going to agree to disagree, because there is still a continued continuity of care. There's other servicers there. So your whole issue is with the actual child advocacy centers.
Well, I think it's a bigger issue than child advocacy centers, but I'm focused on child advocacy centers specifically because they're our most vulnerable children, and that's what this bill focuses on.
But when they go to the child advocacy center, they're being seen by who and treated by who? Licensed clinical providers.
But some of the services are being directed by the organization, right? The organization has oversight as far as how many patients they see, as far as all the different pieces. And so the organization is in charge of.
Well, but that's not
They're
an issue.
hiring.
So that's not an issue in the county that I represent. And so the county that I represent, those services are the strategies and the services. So you're saying you want to have regulations to create that all the strategies and services and these things all have to be the same?
The Child Advocacy Center model is that. The Child Advocacy Center model, the National Children's Alliance says there's certain types of trauma services that have to be offered. You have to offer the evidence-based treatments, et cetera.
And they all offer that. So because the child advocacy centers are established as M. Casa says it really great, is that a one-stop shop that responds to sexually abused children. The National Children's Alliance provides accreditation standards, and in Maryland, the Maryland Children's Alliance provides further oversight and public education. If there is misconduct by a professional working with CAC, the appropriate remedy is to complain to the relevant professional board. So your issue is once again, there's already these mechanisms in place, but you guys want more control over it.
The mechanisms in place, there aren't mechanisms in place. I lived this, I experienced this. I'm telling you that we went everywhere to ensure continuity of care for the kids that we were seeing, that we were cut off from services of, and there were no mechanisms in place. And also, there was no place to make a complaint to. We went everywhere. So there's a reason for this bill. There is a gap here. And if this bill does not pass and it's not corrected, that gap continues to exist, and children are vulnerable. Children are vulnerable at these centers, and these are kids that many of them are suicidal, are in child protective services care, et cetera.
Okay, so I don't think we're gonna agree on many things on this, because the services are still being provided. They're being provided by a licensed mental health professional. They're being provided by the guidelines that they are required to follow, the ethics that they're required to follow, and your concern is that the centers may be lacking in a continuity of care after someone is dismissed.
The centers are at times deciding that treatment is terminated, and when that happens, that the psychologists, the social workers, the mental health providers have no control in ensuring continuity of care and in following their guidelines. They are stopped from doing it. And the centers there's no recourse. There's no way to make them do continuity of care. Most of them hopefully do, right? Child advocacy centers are wonderful places that for the most part, do the right thing. But if they don't do the right thing, there's no mechanism to make sure that kids aren't hurt and harmed.
I'll tell you, as someone that's worked with the CACs over the past couple decades, you and I have a completely different opinion on how the CACs advocate and continue to advocate for those most vulnerable.
Oh, I think they're amazing. So my guess is we have.
They're not. But you're saying most of the time, or that they're taking young people at their most critical and vulnerable times.
Yes.
And they're providing them with services. They're providing them with resources.
Absolutely.
But by the mere inference of this bill being here,
Go ahead, keep going.
is that somehow you've acknowledged that by this issue in Montgomery County was the kind of the impetus behind this. I think that's shockingly not the issue that we should be looking at, as far as we should be looking at, oh, let's try to get for $12,500. That's quite a bit of an overreach for government oversight to once again be involved in the overregulation of certain areas where services are being provided by these organizations at a wonderful service that they are being provided by. And they're not a government entity. They are providing these services to these critical and these vulnerable youths. And I couldn't be prouder to work with them. And I just think that this is once again government trying to overregulate, because the kids and the volume of kids that they have and the patient ratios that they have in Baltimore are different than what we have in Frederick County. And if we start getting into this regulation again, we're going to start adding more to this than just this initial little bit here. We're going to start adding other requirements that are not going to be able to be met. And the services that they are currently providing are wonderful and tangible services, that are tangible services that are imperative to many people in our community. And I don't want to see, and I see a bill like this coming and undermining the whole idea of that.
Well, that is definitely not the intent. I think that everybody in support of this bill understands and values child advocacy centers. I love child advocacy centers. I'm still working closely with the Child Advocacy Center, and I agree with much of what you said as far as how amazing they are, how important the services are. The intent is not to undermine at all what they're doing. They are incredible. The intent is to make sure that what they're doing has some oversight so that it's always done well and no kids are ever harmed. And it's not a big ask to ensure that there's a continuity of care and to have a mechanism so if something ever does go wrong, that there can be a place for it to be reported and investigated. No place is perfect. There's no system organization that is perfect, and without oversight, then kids can be harmed.
But we have nothing showing that they're being harmed now. So we have a bill looking for a problem where these people are providing outstanding services. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and my apologies. I should have done this before. Point of personal privilege. Dr. Wolf is my constituent, and I just wanted to say hello and thank you for being here. And Dr. Savage, nice to see you again. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So we're merely across the street from the House, but you can see that these are two very different places. And so just to say, I know this hearing went a little differently than it did in the House. I understand that, but just understand that it's nothing personal. Utmost of respect is accorded. It was about the idea, not the individuals. Just want to make sure that, I know folks feel some kind of way sometimes. It's late in session and we're all kind of overworked, but I want to make sure that, look, this is all on the merits. And I appreciate the committee's discussion and rigorous analysis of the bill. So thank you very much. All right, so that'll conclude the hearing for the proponents of the bill. We'll now switch over to the opposition panel, and we're going to go to Wendy Myers and Lieutenant Paul Mazzarelli from Harford County. Also say, look, we are going to be on the floor at 5:30. The president has called us back. So time is the most valuable commodity during session. It gets more valuable as the days get shorter. We will probably not be able to vote today. So just understanding that. All right, welcome.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Chair Smith and committee members. I'm Wendy Myers. I'm the Executive Director of Maryland Children's Alliance, or MCA. MCA is the statewide convener of Maryland's 24 child advocacy centers. And I think it's okay for me to say CACs now because we've heard it quite a few times today. So every CAC in the state is a member of MCA and also a member of the national accrediting body, the National Children's Alliance. We're requesting an unfavorable report on House Bill 1480 for the following reasons. There's no data that indicates that continuity of care is a systemic problem in Maryland. Maryland CACs served 26,443 children over the past 5 years. During this time, there was one written and one verbal complaint reported. This information was gathered as a result of a summer study, which you heard about previously today. This bill would require a CAC to report a change in medical or mental health provider to a parent or guardian when known to the CAC. In almost all CACs, and actually 20 out of 24 CACs, the mental health and medical services provider is not a CAC employee, but a contracted third party. Additionally, by using the term parent or guardian in the notification process established by the bill, as you've heard today, it could potentially cause additional harm. Last year, Maryland CAC served 5,387 children. In 1,715 of those cases, the parent or step-parent was the maltreater in that case. So the requirement to notify a parent could jeopardize the investigation and certainly place children at risk of harm. House Bill 1480 requires GOCAP to collect data on standards and complaints from CACs annually. GOCAP has existing oversight of Maryland CACs, and I'm hearing that there's been some changing back and forth about who would potentially have that complaint process. With DHS having that complaint process, that would create an issue. Oh, may I continue? Briefly, DHS is actually one of our partnering members of our multidisciplinary teams. To have one partner having oversight over the other 4 partnering agencies could basically destroy those multidisciplinary teams. Everyone has an equal seat at the table on those teams. Licensed mental health professionals have a continuity of care requirement, as we've talked about today already, and for all those reasons, we're asking for an unfavorable report today. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Good afternoon, Chair Smith and committee members. My name is Paul Marziali. I'm a lieutenant with the Harford County Sheriff's Office. I'm also the director of the Harford County Child Advocacy Center. I believe some of the points that I'm going to drive home today have pretty much already been discussed in the room, but I will continue with the testimony. Been in law enforcement for 20 years. I've been in my current assignment for 4 at the Child Advocacy Center. We are requesting an unfavorable report of House Bill 1480 for the following reasons. Again, some of this is going to be reiterated from what's already been said today, but as the director of a Maryland Child Advocacy Center, I have many responsibilities which require me to bring together a team to investigate and prosecute cases of child abuse, neglect, child exploitation, and trafficking. This multidisciplinary team is required by Maryland statute to provide these services. House Bill 1480 would require my Child Advocacy Center to report a change in medical or mental health provider to a parent. At my Child Advocacy Center, the mental health and medical services providers are not Child Advocacy Center employees. They are contracted third parties pursuant to linkage agreements. So I would not necessarily have knowledge of a change in provider and would certainly have no control or input on those changes that take place. Additionally, by using the term quote-unquote parent, this puts children at additional risks of harm, as we previously stated. In 2024, the Harford County CAC served 338 children. In 109 of those cases, the parent or step-parent was the maltreater, so alerting the parent could jeopardize our investigation and place children at further risk of harm. We, like every Maryland Child Advocacy Center, only partner with licensed mental health professionals, as we've said many times in here today. These providers already have a continuity of care requirement that is governed by their licensure. The Maryland Code outlines the continuity of care for psychologists and social workers. These boards are tasked with investigating complaints against professionals that are licensed under their authority. For these reasons, we are asking for an unfavorable report for House Bill 1480. Also, as stated, and it was actually written down in my notes here, this is a solution that appears to be looking for a problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question, I think, for the principal opponent, a lady, I can't recall your name.
Wendy Myers?
Yes, Wendy. Thank you very much.
Sorry. Wendy Myers.
Delegate Cardin, during his testimony in favor of this bill, indicated that there was a lot of work done this past summer. There was a work group, and there were your side was there, and the other side was there, and he indicated that he thought that they had reached agreement on the issues, only to introduce this bill and find out that your side is still disagreeing with the bill. So tell me, what did he get wrong? Was there a work group last summer? Did you all
I must have been
participate?
part of a different work group. I was in the work group with GOCAP, DHS, and Maryland Children's Alliance. The proponents of the bill were not part of that work group. So I think perhaps that was a different group that he was referring to.
So does this bill not reflect the agreement which was produced by that work group?
We did not discuss language for a bill. What we discussed was what Chair Pena-Melnick requested that we address, which was complaints over the past 5 years for child advocacy centers, if there were policies and agreements in place, and one other thing that is escaping me at the moment, but there were three components to that report, and we did file the report in September of '24 with the chair.
And you're saying this bill does not reflect the agreement that you reached at the end of the work group?
I hesitate to say agreement. We weren't there to determine that if there was an agreement or consensus. We were there to answer the 3 questions regarding complaints at CACs.
Because I note that co-sponsors of this bill are Chair Pena-Melnick and Vice Chair Bonnie Collison of the House and Government Operations Committee in the House. So what you're saying is that this bill does not reflect the results of last summer's work group?
I kind of see it as 2 different things. The work group was there to determine if there was a problem. They asked us to determine, if there were a lot of complaints coming into CACs. I will say that if there's a complaint regarding, DHS, then that would go to DHS. If there's a complaint regarding, Harford County Sheriff's Office, it would go to them. It wouldn't probably go to the CAC itself. But our task was to determine the answer to 3 questions, which we did, with Maryland Children's Alliance, GOCAP, and DHS convening multiple times over the interim.
Okay. Well, I was on HGO some years ago when I was in the House. And there were a number of occasions when the chair of HGO directed that summer study be engaged in by the parties. And when the parties worked together and came to an accord at the end of the summer, we had legislation introduced that passed pretty easily. If one of the parties declined to participate or was obstinate, that party tended not to fare well in the next legislative session because the chair of the committee obviously wanted the parties to try to bridge gaps. So in this case, did you all reach out to try to bridge the gap, or were you obstinate?
We've tried to meet with the proponents of the bill over the past 3 years. We have, as you heard earlier today, we have met. I don't recall how many times, forgive me, but we have met. There are some particulars that we do not agree with as far as the things we've testified today.
Well, let me conclude with this. If we don't pass this bill this year, are you prepared to meet this coming summer with the advocates for the bill to try to see if you can bridge gaps and try to come to a consensus?
I'm happy to meet at any time, and I'm sure my colleagues feel the same way. If it involves child advocacy centers, then we want what's best for our children. Today's the first day of Child Abuse Prevention Month, and so I would encourage everyone to certainly contact your CACs locally and help them there. But yes, the short answer is yes. Of course, we will meet. But I do think that I should mention that we are creating statewide standards, which will be launched later this year from Maryland Children's Alliance. So I think that, as we've been working towards this for the past many years, this will happen this summer.
Let me just conclude by saying that if there should be a work group this coming summer, I would hope that people on both sides would enter into the work group using what I called sympathetic listening to the other side sympathetically, trying to find areas of agreement to help bridge the gap, in the hope that once the bridge was partially built on both sides, the remaining gap would be narrow enough that it could be bridged. Thank you very much for your question and for your answers to my questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here. So if I had a complaint about something that the CAC had done, to whom would I go with that complaint?
I guess that would depend on the particular of the complaint. We have a lot of parents that are upset about, their child has been maltreated. We can all probably imagine that there are all kinds of things that they want to happen. We aren't able to charge in every single one of these cases. And so frequently parents do, contact law enforcement organizations or our prosecutors' offices, and they say, I want this, I want my child to have their day in court. This is a problem, and, we don't want this to happen to anyone else, which we can all agree with that. But sometimes you can't charge sometimes, and you can't convict someone sometimes. Sometimes we don't get, the convictions that we want. So those complaints would go to the prosecutor's office or to law enforcement. Sometimes folks have a care plan from their Child Protective Services worker that they're not happy with. They would probably complain to DHS or DSS in those cases. But if it's a specific CAC complaint, what happens is it goes to the CAC director. At that point, there's a what's the word? There's a report that's filed at that point. It comes to Maryland Children's Alliance. I forward it on with my comments and my synopsis to the national accrediting body, which is National Children's Alliance.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Hopefully you listened to some of the discussion between myself and the bill sponsor and the Dr. Wolf. So I guess the question I'm trying to figure out right now is, and hopefully you know this, so if I'm a psychologist in the state of Maryland and I can no longer treat a particular patient, generally what is my continuity of care requirement under the COMAR regulations?
That you would have to have an exit session with the client.
Okay. So now if I'm a psychologist and I'm employed by an organization, they're not psychologists, but I'm employed by them and they provide some services, and I'm terminated by that employer, and let's say it's for cause for some nefarious stuff, what happens then? There's a continuity of care on a licensed psychologist, but I've just been credibly accused of something bad. I work for an organization that is not a psychologist or a bunch of psychologists. What is the continuity of care? This clearly must happen. It's not just an easy. So what happens in those circumstances? What's the continuity of care in those circumstances?
So it happens even, sometimes people pass away, right? Unexpectedly that happens, and they can't provide, those exit sessions. In those situations, the CAC then, well, in 20 of our CACs, it would be the third party that would then contact the family and let them know.
I'm sorry, who's the third party?
So in four of our 24 CACs have in-house mental health providers that are actual CAC employees. The other 20 have a third party that provides those services by way of linkage agreements. So I think you have in your packet a couple of letters. One would be from...
Let's just really stay focused on the question.
Okay.
So I work for a company.
Yes.
They are not psychologists. I have been terminated for cause. What is the continuity of care under those circumstances in the state of Maryland?
So I can't speak for the whole state, but as far as in our situation, what happens is the CAC or the provider would then contact the family and say, your provider is no longer available. This is going to be your new provider, or you have these particular options for new providers.
So is it only CACs that get away with not providing any kind of exit help in any way? Because I'm very confused, like in every, if I'm a psychologist and I work for somebody else, you're telling me in the state of Maryland, unless I was personally directly hired by the client, in which case I can't fire myself, so I do an exit, an exit thing.
Sure.
In every other employer situation, there is no exit requirement in COMAR. So in a sense, Delegate Cardin was correct. There is no protection when you work for another entity, right? So the COMAR regs really don't stand for the proposition that there's continuity of care when the provider of mental health services works for somebody else, right?
Which is why in our state standards for Maryland Children's Alliance, we are adding that into the state standards, so that I can't speak to health departments and school systems and all that, they're higher than.
So it does bother me that there's, it's
for
like somebody got the
CACs.
memo on the testimony here, and all the opposition just parrots the same language without any detail, which basically like, don't worry about this, we have COMAR regs, but none of those COMAR regs, so the good delegate's right, the COMAR regs do not address when you work for a third party and you're terminated for some reason, or you cannot provide service anymore. There is no continuity of care in the sense of getting an exit goodbye session, right? You're told person's leaving you. You're not even told why, probably. So everybody that has this in their testimony, that's really disingenuous, in my opinion, or certainly inaccurate and misleading, because it makes you think, oh, those psychologists all have to live up to some continuity of care, but that's not the issue here. They work for somebody else, and in those circumstances, when they lose their job, there aren't the protections. That is what the bill is trying to do, right?
Actually, but the difference, though, is that these third parties, they are the employers of the psychologist, and they are held by those standards.
What standards?
The COMAR standards.
So I'm not a psychologist, I'm an employer psychologist, but the COMAR standard that applies to the psychologist I just fired puts I have to do what?
So what happens is, like for Paul's CAC, they contract with a third party, and that third party provides the continuity of care for their own employees. They have their continuity of care policy for their own employees. It doesn't have anything to do with the CAC, because the CAC wouldn't contact that family.
Is that a standard continuity of care that's across the board in Maryland?
I don't know if it's standardized.
So what is the continuity of care in those circumstances?
It's that the organization will provide continuity of care. The organization.
What is that? No, I don't want the phrase. What is the continuity? What is the continuity of care that those employers are providing?
They will provide. Sorry, I didn't mean to speak.
I just want to make sure we get the right.
So they will provide that exit session. They will provide new opportunities for that individual.
They provide an exit session? With whom? Who is the child going to talk to in the exit session if it's not the therapist themselves?
They would probably have a different therapist that would provide that session.
Is that what happened in the Montgomery County case?
They were all offered, all those families were offered services
Were
following
they offered
that
an
case.
exit session?
With a different provider, yes.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for coming out today. Appreciate your work with the Child Advocacy Center. So my question is pretty short and sweet. This is, I know, I lied. It is my understanding that we have that this actually came more so, this bill is coming out of an issue from the Montgomery County incident. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And it's actually because it's a personal issue because of a friendly relationship that the delegate has with one of the aggrieved parties, and that now we want to have this spread to include statewide oversight for an issue that was specifically contained to one CAC. That was actually investigated by 3 different entities and found to have no merit. And they were exonerated on all misconduct. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Any other further questions for this panel? All right, I stepped out for a bit, but my understanding is that these are all the witnesses, and that's the conclusion for this bill. All right, Amity tells me I'm correct. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Delegate Ziegler, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. I was going to say Chair Smith, but Vice Chair Wallstreicher and esteemed members of the committee. For the record, I'm Delegate Natalie Ziegler here with House Bill 470, obscured, modified, or blocked registration plates and registration plate covers. So what this bill does is, as amended, it prohibits obscuring or modifying your license plate in a manner that would prevent identification, and it makes that a secondary offense. It removes the previous requirement of intent to obscure your license plate, which law enforcement has told us made the law essentially unenforceable as a practical matter. And in addition, it prohibits the advertisement and promotion of license plate covers by falsely claiming that they are legal in the state, and identifies doing so as an unfair, abusive, or deceptive trade practice. So why is this important? Obscuring license plates is a growing problem with a significant impact on revenue. MDOT, which supports the bill, estimated that in 2023 alone, they lost $2 million just from Easy Pass plates that they couldn't read. So that doesn't even include the now much higher fines in work zones for speeding, red light cameras, et cetera. So it's also a safety issue. Data shows that when you get a really high speeding ticket, it really does change behavior, but not if we can't read your plate. So amber alerts, silver alerts, red light cameras, finding suspects with outstanding warrants, and more are all dependent on license plates we can read. As I mentioned, MDOT supports the bill, as does the Maryland Chiefs of Police Association and the Maryland Sheriff's Association. And with that, I ask for a favorable report. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Delegate. Questions from the committee? Senator Love.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Delegate. Thank you for bringing this bill. I believe this is the second year.
It is the second year.
A lot of work was done on this bill, and I want to commend you for it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Senator Sidnor.
Thank you very much. There's a good bit of things that I like in the legislation. The sole thing that I may have the issue, though, is with in line 29 and 30 on page 3 regarding the intent, and I'll tell you why. And then I think I shared this with this committee when I had the bill that I had earlier this session dealing with traffic stops. And I do thank you because on line 10 on the same page, you get rid of, you remove the clear plate covers. My wife was pulled over because she had a clear license plate cover to protect our vehicle's license plate. And she was pulled over. And I remember having a conversation with the law enforcement officer. I mean, and she was let go, nothing else happened, but she was pulled over nonetheless. And I'm sure, as you know, traffic stops can be dangerous for both the drivers, passengers, as well as law enforcement
100%,
officers.
absolutely.
And I remember having a conversation with a law enforcement officer about that, and he said, yeah, we're allowed to do that. It's in the law. By removing, I can see where it makes it easier for law enforcement to get you by removing the intent to avoid, but this is essentially by saying that, by modifying it to it being a manner that may prevent identification, somewhat more like a strict liability type of offense, right?
Yeah, well, law enforcement says that the intent, well, it seems to me it's obvious if you buy one of those things and stick it on your, one of the dark things and stick it on your license plate. To me, it's obvious that you intended to do that, didn't happen by accident. But apparently, it's really essentially impossible to prove in court. So police officers say they just can't write tickets. So what we did with this bill was to make it a secondary offense. So your wife could not have been pulled over for that. She could have been pulled over for, speeding or doing something else. And then
right under your bill.
In this bill, yes, right. Exactly. So that's that was an important issue.
And I'm trying to balance in my mind, because the other thing that you do that I like, on line 11, you remove the word cover, and use obscure or block, which to me sounds more intentional rather than just covering. So,
Yeah, the purpose of it really is to, first of all, prohibit people from selling those covers and falsely claiming, falsely claiming that they're legal because they are not.
Right.
And then, hopefully, I would love to just see fewer traffic stops. As you point out, they're not good for drivers, they're not good for law enforcement. Right. They're potentially dangerous and lots of problems. So if we can just send you a ticket, I think that's far preferable.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay.
All right, further questions from the committee? Well, Delegate, thank you very much. Apologies and thank you for your patience. I'm sorry if you were hanging on there.
Thank you very much.
I do echo Senator Love's sentiments. I know that a lot of work's been done on the bill, so thank you very much. All right, is that? I'm sorry, there's no one else left to testify on behalf of this bill. So that'll conclude the hearing for House Bill 470. All right, we're now here. We'll now move on to House Bill 591. Delegate Embry is on the floor going through those third readers. So we're going to go just down the favorable. If Thomas Webb would like to come up, and then we'll hear from Grayson. Mr. Webb, welcome.
Good afternoon. Tom Webb of the Baltimore City Law Department, the Affirmative Litigation Division, Head of Consumer Protection. Thank you for having me here today. This is a consumer protection bill, and as you guys know, consumer protection laws protect individuals from unfair, deceptive, or abusive trade practices. So these laws can protect folks from illegal or undisclosed fees, from illegal interest rates on credit cards, from an unlicensed home contractor screwing up your bathroom and not giving you a refund, or in the bill that we just heard, someone representing that a particular sale is legal when it is in fact not. And local jurisdictions across the state, including Baltimore City, can bring actions to protect consumers' rights. But right now, we only have 1 year to do so. So after 1 year, we can no longer bring actions under our current statute of limitations. And what this means practically is that there are a lot of people who are victims of these practices who we can no longer protect. It may take people time to realize that they've in fact been the victim of one of these practices. It may take people time to actually gather the evidence to prove that they are victims of one of these practices. And if folks come to us a year late, there's at least a good argument that we cannot do anything for them. So local jurisdictions are hamstrung. But this bill solves that problem. It simply brings the statute of limitations in line with the private statute of limitations in Maryland, which is for 3 years. It offers up a discovery rule, which is also the rule for private causes of action that says if we knew, reasonably knew or should have known from that date, the statute of limitations will run. This is an important part of the bill for us, the discovery rule, because as a local government, we're not going to often know when these things are happening. We don't know unless we are told. So we just don't want to be hamstrung in cases where someone gets to us 1 year and 1 day late and we cannot do anything on their behalf. So I would respectfully request a favorable report on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have no problem at all extending the statute of limitations from 1 year to 3 years. 3 years is the standard statute of limitations in Maryland, and I think it's a pretty good amount of time. Where I have difficulties is the provision that says after local authorities, whoever local authorities are, knew and reasonably should have known of the violation. So you mentioned credit card. So let's assume a bank computes the interest on its credit card and sends out notices to its credit card holders. And this happens for, from now on, month after month after month. Are you saying that if some local government official who is a local authority doesn't realize what's going on until 8 years later, that the authority would have 3 years from that point, 11 years after the incorrect interest, the allegedly incorrect interest was started to be charged in order to file a suit against the bank?
Sure. Well, it wouldn't be quite that simple because the language is knew or reasonably should have known. So there is some protection, right? It's not carte blanche for a local government just to say, well, we didn't know, so we get this brand new 3-year statute of limitations from that point. We would actually have a burden at that point to show that there was good reason that we could not have found that out. If this was publicly available information, then that defense would likely not be available to us. If we had in fact been told by somebody and simply not acted on that information, that wouldn't be available to us. So there are protections.
Who are the
built
local
into that.
authorities we're talking about here? Are we talking about state's attorneys, or public defenders,
Sure.
a city councilman, the head of a public housing authority? I mean, who are these local authorities that either knew or should have known?
In the case of civil citations, which is what my division does, it would be for Baltimore City, it would be Baltimore City Solicitor.
How about a city councilman? Isn't that a local authority?
It is a local authority. So yes, I mean, I think that if a defendant could show that a qualified representative of the city was made aware of a specific practice and the city didn't act on that information, they would have a
Suppose a
defense
complaint was filed with the with the Baltimore City Sheriff or a judge of the Orphans Court, and the judge of the Orphans Court didn't take any action on it. Would that constitute should have known?
I think we'll be splitting legal hairs here. I think that the answer in that situation, the Baltimore City Sheriff is a local agency. It's a part of the Baltimore City Municipal Corporation, so I think that likely would qualify. I think a judge of the Orphans Court would likely fall under a state agency, so I think that would be a more complicated issue.
Are there any other statute of limitations provisions in Maryland law that condition the starting of the running of the statute of limitations after, quote, local authorities, close quotes, knew or should have known of the violation?
Yes, Senator. There's two that I can point to here. One is actually in CJP 1-106, which is the section we would be amending here, and that applies to environmental actions brought by Talbot County. Exactly the same language is in there, and it's also an MDE.
Environmental actions filed in Talbot County?
Exactly. Absolutely. It's CJP 5-106. Courts and Judicial Proceedings 106.
So it's like a local statute only applying to Talbot County?
Yes. I mean, it's similar, though, to this one, in which this is a statute that would also only apply to localities.
Well, this would be a statewide statute. I'm not sure how that statute got enacted. I wasn't around when it was. I think I would have objected. So what was the second example?
The second one is applicable to MDE. So for
Excuse me?
MDE, the Maryland Department of Environment. So under Environment Article 1-303, again, it's governed, it's really exactly the same language that we use. So it's a 3-year statute of limitations, and it includes that discovery rule language. It's exactly the same language.
Does it use the term local authorities, or does it use the term MDE?
I would probably, I don't have it in front of me. My guess is it would say MDE or the agency or something along those lines. It would be whether MDE had notice.
Well, at least in that case, we've identified its specific agency, which would have to either have known or should have known, rather than simply local authorities.
That's true. That's true. Although I think, I mean, if anything, local authorities could potentially be read more broadly, given that we don't have a specific individual cited. May give more leeway.
I guess my problem is, banks and other financial institutions need certainty. And the idea that they would have to retain documents indefinitely because of a possibility that some local authority didn't find out about something until 15 years after the problem happened is imposing a huge requirement on financial institutions to store and maintain records. So it would be much better for them to have a date certain when the statute starts, rather than this indefinite when local authorities should have known. But thank you for your answers to my questions.
Thank you.
Yes, I think Senator West kind of covered it, but I think, I believe the Attorney General came in, you might be aware of this, right? In the last year or two, and asked for us to extend a couple of statutes of limitations. I forget, one might have been in the environmental arena, I've forgotten. Does it ring a bell with you? Like
It rings a vague bell, Senator, although I don't think I'm an expert on it. I believe the AG's office, even the Consumer Protection Division, may have been in, but I honestly do not know.
So give me a sense of a couple of things. One, how many counties we are when you say local consumer protection, assuming you're referring to the 24 local jurisdictions. So how many of them have local consumer protection codes?
Sure.
My second question is, how uniform are they across the codes?
Yep, great question. So there is 3 of us currently. Baltimore City is new. We passed one about 1.5 years ago. Howard County has a local consumer protection code and office, and Montgomery County also has a local consumer protection code and office. To your second question, so what the city did is we just adopted the state statute. There is a state Consumer Protection Act, and the city simply adopted that one. Howard and Montgomery County didn't quite do it as, just as wholesale adoption, but the definition of unfair, deceptive, and trade practice is uniform across the board. They borrow from federal language for that.
You might see where I'm going. It's banking, for example, heavily regulated. A lot of industries are heavily regulated, and they have some certainty, especially at the state and federal level, because, the laws, in Maryland across the board are all the same. At the federal level, they're all the same. But when you come into a state and you potentially get 24 jurisdictions that are not, we're not requiring them, at the moment anyway, to have a uniform, consumer protection code, which then a bank would say, okay, especially if it's identical to the state, then I know when I'm complying with the state, I'm complying with the 24 jurisdictions.
Right.
But without that kind of guaranteed of uniformity, and I'm using banks, but you can think of other situations, this would be difficult to stay in compliance, for one, perhaps, or stay on top of, because these local codes could be changed even a little more easily perhaps than they are here, right? So I have a little bit of problem with that. And then I'm trying to see, give me some examples of the need for this in any event, because, we have what, is it a 1 year? It's a 1 year statute now. And I do remember the hearing from the AG. This was an old statute, it was an interesting hearing actually, because they brought up a lot of ancient law and how it all came about. But there was some, at least back when this was created, that there was some obligation in the enforcement world to stay frisky, to stay on top of this. And I feel like I have 2 concerns. One, this allows the locals to be a little less vigilant on the subject because they've got more time. And quite frankly, again, as the Senator West indicated, let me put it this way, I just don't know about the resources for you all staying the same way the state is in terms of your actually monitoring these places. So this gives you a little bit of a pass, like, oh, we don't have that many staff, it's kind of a new office, but listen, we got a really long statute of limitations, and we got a knew or should have known, so we can kind of be like, we didn't know. We didn't have a lot of staff. So, with those kind of concerns with abuse and maybe tilting, how would you respond to that?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that I would say is I would, kind of gently push back a little bit on really long, right? I mean, 3 years here is, as I said, is just back to the standard statute of limitations in Maryland. And so in terms of all these corporations, I mean, in terms of private causes of action, this is exactly what they're exposed to anyway. So this isn't anything kind of new or strange in that respect. And I actually think the way we intend to use it, the way we would hope to use it, is to use that time to do diligent investigations, right? So that's what the AG's office does. I used to work at the AG's office on their consumer protection work. And what they do a great job of is they do a lot of investigating before they bring a case, right? So that gives you an opportunity to make sure actually violations are happening, right? If you decide that there are, it gives you time to negotiate with whoever you're talking to. You can say, we're considering bringing this action, but we'd like to reach some kind of negotiated settlement. And so I think it would actually be better and allow for more informed decision-making, better decision-making, rather than having a local jurisdiction feel like they've got to fly off the handle a little bit quickly, or else otherwise we're not going to be able to vindicate the rights of consumers.
That's a good pushback. That's gentle. So why is it that the 3 local jurisdictions are confined to a year anyway?
So that's the provision in CJP, and now I don't have the section right in front of me, but it's not consumer protection specific. It basically says that any action or a fine and this is me speculating, so I'm not pretending to be an expert, but I think if we were talking about a parking ticket, right? If we were talking about a fine of that nature, I can absolutely understand a 1-year statute of limitations. I don't think that 1 year foresaw really complete investigations or more complicated cases. I think they were envisioning very simple kind of citations, parking tickets, things like that, for which I think 1 year makes a ton of sense. I just think for a slightly more complicated action where, as you say, there's more at stake for the business and for the government, I think having that 3 years is important for everyone.
So you think it's in the course of judicial proceedings, there's a statute that talks about with fines and penalties, which are basically what you all you're doing. Exactly. There is a 1-year statute.
There's a 1-year statute, and what it is CJP 5-106 provides exceptions to that 1 year, right? So the statute says 1 year except for is provided in CJP 5-106. Yes. There's a long list of exceptions, including the one for Talbot County that I mentioned before. We would just to be added to that specifically for local consumer protection action.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, I was going to ask you why you needed this on top of the Consumer Protection Act, the CPA. So why doesn't that cover this, whatever you're trying to enforce here with these?
I didn't hear the second part. Why do you need on top of this, on top of what?
On top of the Consumer Protection Act. Like why is the state CPA not enough for what you want to do?
Well, I think the state CPA is great, but I think it's also fantastic for the local jurisdictions like Montgomery County, Howard County, and the city to have those additional resources to try to vindicate the rights of their consumers. So I worked at the AG's office. I worked on enforcing the state consumer protection statute. There's really fantastic work done there, but everybody is limited by resources, and they are also focusing entirely statewide. I think having an agency within the city, which I work for, where we're really connected to folks in the city, we work with nonprofits in the city. We work with our local legislators.
I guess what I was getting at was like usually, so like for misdemeanors, so this does have criminal penalties in it associated with, as does the CPA, but but usually for misdemeanors, it's what is the statute of limitations for misdemeanors? Usually a 1 year, not 3 years, right?
Right.
And then this is a little bit more expansive than what we have on the books now. So for misdemeanor, you're expanding that statute of limitations potentially to 3 years after the authorities knew or reasonably should have known of the violation. So it's a little bit, I mean, it's a slightly larger departure from what we have on the books now.
And I do understand that, and I would be part of the civil wing here, right? Yeah. So it would be the state's attorney's office in the city that would enforce that. So I can say, at least as a proponent, I can certainly talk to and work with Delegate Embry. Our focus is on the civil side of this and not on the criminal side of it. So if that is a concern from folks, I think what we would certainly be, I don't want to speak too much for Delegate Embry, but I'm sure she'd be willing to talk to folks to speak to that issue, because what we're really focused on here is the civil side of things.
Got it. I mean, even so, like that's what I thought, because I mean, like you got treble damage you can do. I mean, these are all things that are used to curtail bad behavior, negligent or reckless behavior. So like that seems to me to be like where you want to live, not the criminal side of the house.
Absolutely.
But, yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Further questions from the committee? Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Excellent. All right. We'll now hear from Mr. Wiggins.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Grayson Wiggins here on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce in opposition to the bill. Our primary concern is the language at the tail end of the statute of limitations regarding when local authorities knew or should have reasonably known. The hypothetical from Senator West shed some light on that. I would just note that on the House side, testimony was provided that a claimant, an individual who was alleging a wrong, could have known about this for 5 years and sat on it, and then at that time reported it to the local authorities, so however we want to define that, and that the local authorities would then have another 3 years to bring a case. So that's problematic considering not only the civil penalties involved, but also, to your point, Mr. Chair, the criminal penalties that are involved here. And I would just note that I know the proponents have indicated that this is comparative to state law, or there's a comparison to state law and what's happening at the state level. From our perspective, we have questions about how that's being interpreted, whether or not the statute and this discovery rule are being sort of misconstrued and how they're structured, in the bill. But I would also note that and I think this is to Senator James's point, is that the statutes vary significantly. There's not really a comparison between some of these local statutes and what we have at the state level. For example, I know the proponents mentioned that Baltimore City codified state law, but there are a lot of missing provisions if that's what they intended to do. Under Title 13 of the commercial law, they're very descriptive about what is and is not an alleged violation. The city law, as we have it, is is very broad, very vague in what an alleged violation would be. And then just the final point here is the criminal penalty aspect. To your point, Mr. Chair, I know that there's been a lot of discussion this session about the CPA having those criminal penalties, and some bills have actually had those criminal penalty citations removed from them, both in the Senate and the House. And so that's an issue we would want to obviously address from the Chamber's perspective. They have to take any questions.
Chair, so let me ask you, Mr. Wiggins, if this bill were to pass in current form, when could a financial institution discard records which might contain information about something the institution might have done which allegedly violated consumer laws? Would the institution have to retain those records possibly indefinitely?
I believe they would have to indefinitely, based on my understanding of the language in the bill before us today, and some of the testimony that was provided on the House side. This isn't even a situation where, as I mentioned in my testimony, where a local authority knew, because a claimant, a person who's alleging a violation could know. They could potentially even pursue their own civil action and then wait until that plays out and then alert local authorities. And that would then start the 3-year clock. And so I think records would have to be retained, to your point, indefinitely. And just one quick other note, I know that the Talbot County law was mentioned under CJP 5-106. That is actually specific to the critical area of the Chesapeake Bay in Talbot County for specific environmental issues. That is not specific even, or that is not even wholly granted to Talbot County as a whole. So it's very specific.
Okay, thank you.
It sounds like, look, so if we amended the bill, took out the criminal penalties and did it from 3 years after the incident occurred, is that your kind of your?
I think that would alleviate the concerns, Mr. Chair. I would also note that the bill was introduced last year originally as a 3-year statute of limitation from the date the incident occurred. It did not have this language when it was introduced about when the local authorities knew or should have reasonably known.
Understood. Okay. Further questions from the committee? All right, with that, that'll end the testimony and the hearing for House Bill 591 and our hearings for the day. We have to be over at the floor in 8 minutes, so we will not be voting today. It looks like tomorrow the floor starts at I actually don't know when the floor starts tomorrow. So stay tuned for voting tomorrow. Just be flexible. As early as 9, no earlier than 9, but just depending on when the floor starts. So as early as 9, but nothing in stone yet.